Kia ora. My name is J.D. Evans. Let's read a book. This is Melody of a Curse by Jana Ruth. Melody of a Curse is a fantasy. Jana Ruth is an independent author from Aotearoa, and I want to start, as usual, by saying a massive thanks to Jana for allowing me to read the beginning of Melody of a Curse here on YouTube. Due to a series of technical issues this week, I have not read Melody of a Curse. So today's video gets to be another one of those ones where we get to share the first experience of reading the book together. This will be exciting. As I've said before, I do enjoy this format, and we'll still have a good yarn about it at the end. Alright, let's get cracking. He's haunted by nightmares. She's hiding behind her smile. A cursed melody dooms them both. Ever since returning from the war, Jonas has been plagued by nightmares. When he meets the vivacious dancer Sophie, he's drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Her laughter alone banishes the terrors of his dreams. But behind that smile lies a secret. Every night, Sophie follows an irresistible melody into the night, only to return in the morning exhausted, feverish, and with her shoes broken a little more. Worried, Jonas sets out to solve the mystery of her midnight dances. But the intoxicating nightmare he slips into may just be darker than the ones that haunt him. There's a quick note on content here at the start of the book. It mentions that there will be violence and death and references to PTSD. So if that is the sort of thing that you don't like, perhaps this might not be the video for you. Chapter 1. Overture. Debris and ash were falling from the sky. Jonas threw himself flat on the ground. He was barely lying down when a second explosion shook the earth. Screams rose, mixed with the howls of siren. Jonas pressed his hands to his ears, but just as merciless as the shards of glass, the screams drilled deep into his head. A wave of heat surged over him, bringing with it the smell of burning flesh. The screams grew louder, shrieks inhumanly high. He could not escape them. He burned with them and bled with them. At the same time, he dug himself out of the rubble, straining with all his strength, his head always down. Keep your head down. Stay down low. If he could only get away far enough, he might stand a chance. For the third time, his surroundings were torn to pieces. It was his own scream that finally jolted Jonas out of his nightmares. Disoriented and gasping for breath, he looked around the small room. There was no shattered glass anywhere. The beams weren't broken, and the man in the other bed wasn't gasping for air, but snoring. Jonas's heart was beating furiously. The sheets were soaked with sweat, and tears were burning in his eyes. But he was safe. Groaning, Jonas dropped back into the pillow and stared at the ceiling. The gruesome screams still echoed in his head, only interrupted by increasingly violent detonations. The soldier's life and the war were behind him, and yet they wouldn't let him go. It was as if he was standing still while the world continued to spin without him, as if there was nothing else but this nightmare. The longer he stared at the ceiling, the more violently he felt the shocks as the bombs kept exploding in his head. The scar on his back hurt, and Jonas couldn't stand it any longer. He flipped back the covers and got out of bed. A glance at the clock told him it was only 4 a.m. As he dressed, he listened to the surroundings. Apart from the snoring of his roommate, the hostel lay in complete silence. Even the group of bawling teenagers from the night before had long since disappeared into bed. It was this silence that invited the nightmares at night. The silence inside him that he was unable to dispel. Already the memories he was trying to forget were creeping back in. He was in desperate need of a change of scenery, sounds, life. Jonas decided to leave the hostel and use the morning to familiarize himself with the new city. With a little luck, he would hold a job again and would be able to build a new life for himself. All he had to do was get through the job interview without experiencing one of his fits. The fresh air helped him clear away the remnants of his nightmares. It was pleasant outside, not as hot as during the day. The night was filled with sounds. A cooler dripped somewhere behind him, while crickets chirped in the grass. A rustling in the bushes caught Jonas's attention. There had been no bushes in the war, only cold, bare stone. The youth hostel was on a hill outside the tranquil little town the interview was at. Jonas had to walk up it until he had an unobscured view down on the city. Most of the houses lay in darkness, the only light coming from the streetlights. Inevitably, his gaze was drawn to a small sea of lights to the south of the city. As if of their own accord, his feet carried Jonas towards company. Long before he reached the lit streets, he could hear the pulse of life. A bass boomed ahead, mingling with other rhythms, and soon enough Jonas could make out singular melodies. People staggered across the street, laughing and bawling. To his right, a young couple bickered at each other, while further ahead people sang along loudly, out of time. Relieved, Jonas let the sounds carry him along. The day was dawning when, next to Jonas, the door of a club opened. Laughter filled the air. A group of giggling girls stumbled out into the open and joked with the bouncer. Their liveliness captivated Jonas, and he watched the cheerful revelers as they supported each other, chattering loudly and bursting into laughter every now and then. One of the young women in particular caught Jonas's eye. Despite her intoxicated state, she pranced behind the others, as if listening to a music only she heard. As he looked at her, Jonas felt his lips form a smile for the first time in a long while. It took him a while to notice that she was barefoot. Irritated, Jonas followed her trail back and discovered the abandoned shoes near the club door. They weren't high heels, as he had expected, but pointy shoes like the ones they use in ballet. Jonas bent down to pick them up and hurried to catch up to the small group who had now hailed a taxi. "Excuse me?" he called, and the girl turned to him expectantly. For a moment Jonas lost himself in her dark eyes. Then he cleared his throat and lifted the shoes into the air. "You forgot something." Wavering, she looked first to her bare toes as if she needed to verify the accuracy of his statement. "Oh, right. Thank you." Again, Jonas looked at the shoes in his hands. The soles and laces were worn, the straps frayed and dirty. "They seem to be a little worn out." The girl looked up and laughed. "Yeah, kind of." As if she could never stand still long enough, she pranced around on the spot until she stumbled forward. With his left hand, Jonas grabbed her arm. Heat spread through his stomach as he helped her regain her balance. "Are you all right?" She nodded and brushed several strands from her face, an amused grin on her lips. Clearing his throat, Jonas handed her the shoes. "Here." Immediately she raised her hands in defense. "Oh no! My feet are already hurting like hell. I've been dancing all night. I don't think I could even tie my laces." In her condition, Jonas believed her all too readily. Still, he insisted on giving her the shoes. "Sure, but—" "They're just shoes. Broken shoes." The girl grinned mischievously, and Jonas couldn't help but do the same. "You keep them," she suddenly suggested with exuberance. The absurdity of her suggestion made Jonas snort. "I'm afraid they're too small for me." To his delight, her entire face brightened as she burst into laughter. "Come on, Sophie, the taxi's waiting," one of her friends urged, holding the door open for her. With a final grin, Sophie waved at him and stumbled into the taxi with a little help. The door slammed shut, and the lively laughter faded away. Sighing, Jonas looked after the taxi. the broken pair of ballet shoes still in his hand. When the car turned a corner, he checked out the club. Demodi. The name was written in dark, twisted letters above a narrow, nondescript wooden door. The longer he looked, the more it seemed to merge with the building. If Jonas hadn't been standing right next to it earlier, he would have never spotted the entrance among the glowing neon signs of the neighbouring clubs. Confused, Jonas turned away and continued walking, Sophie's image before his eyes. His lips were still smiling, and he felt more alive than he had in a long time. For once in a good mood, he whistled a little song as the world around him slowly woke from its slumber. "Interesting joint, isn't it?" a voice said from below. It took Jonas a moment before he could make out the beggar in his pile of blankets. Nothing about the man was striking. His matted hair hung low in his face, and his eyes darted around unsteadily. A worn plastic cup stood before him. After a moment of hesitation, Jonas fumbled for his wallet and dropped a few coins into the cup. "What do you mean?" The beggar grinned at him, baring crooked yellow teeth. "The Demodi, every maiden's dream." "Maiden?" repeated Jonas incredulously. The last time he had encountered that word, it had been in a storybook. He looked back to where the Demodi was literally disappearing among the other clubs. "Looks more like a hovel to me." The man coughed and patted the ground beside him. "Exactly. It's not supposed to attract just anyone." Jonas hesitated. The beggar was not exactly the company he'd been craving, but what if he wasn't the only one dying for a friendly chat? "So, whose attention is it supposed to draw?" he asked as he took a seat next to the beggar. "Some kind maidens?" The beggar's blue eyes twinkled in amusement as he reached forward and slipped the cup under his warm blankets. "You'll see. You'll see." Jonas wondered what exactly he would see, but the man was preoccupied with himself and muttered to himself, "Somewhere. I know it. Yes, yes. Time and its dreams. There you are." Second-guessing his decision to sit down, Jonas was just about to get up again when the man took out a small bottle. Grunting, he poured the coins from his cup and filled it with a golden liquid, then held the cup out to Jonas. "Here, drink." Doubtful, Jonas looked at the greyish rim of the cup. His thoughts immediately jumped to the numerous bacteria that were surely cavorting in the cup. He didn't even want to think about the illnesses he would contract from it. And so what? If the war hadn't killed him, this cup certainly wouldn't. Bold. Jonas reached for the cup and took a sip. He almost spat it out again. The liquor tasted that disgusting. Laughing, the beggar took the cup from him and emptied it in one go. "Not used to much, eh?" Jonas screwed up his face, a disgusting taste still lingering on his tongue. "But well-mannered and friendly. Not everyone sits down with old Manu." "What kind of club is that?" Jonas asked when he could breathe again, trying to get at least something sensible out of the old man. "Oh, the most beautiful place on earth, richer than any treasury and filled with heavenly pleasures." The man regarded the club longingly before turning away again. "And the coldest. Here, let me give you something." To Jonas's dismay, the beggar began to peel off the topmost blanket, which turned out to be a ragged winter coat, and handed it to Jonas. Jonas raised his hands in protest. "Oh no, I can't accept that. You need this more than I do. It's still warm now, but later—" "Take it, boy," the beggar growled with surprising vehemence. "This is no ordinary coat." Skeptically, Jonas raised his brows. "It isn't?" The beggar nodded, his mind already elsewhere. "You will discover its secret yet. Believe me, it'll be more use to you than to me. It's from the club." Jonas could think of nothing to say in reply and left it at a simple, "Thank you." The beggar smiled benevolently. "Trust me, you can use it to get to all of those wonderful dreams." Jonas looked doubtfully at the tattered coat. Now he was the owner of not one, but 2 items of clothing that belonged in the nearest bin. Maybe he should consider opening a second-hand shop when the job interview would go south as usual. No sooner had the beggar handed over his gift than he lost interest in Jonas. "Now get out of here, boy." Irritated, Jonas stood up. As he slowly backed away, he kept glancing over his shoulder. The beggar paid him no more attention and instead disappeared back into his blankets, as unassuming as the Demodi. Jonas regarded his new heirloom. In the sunlight it no longer looked so dirty. On the contrary, the dirt had disappeared to reveal a fabric finer than anything he had ever held in his hand. It felt incredibly soft and light, like velvet. When he rubbed the fine fabric back and forth between his fingers, it even shimmered in the sunlight. Seriously doubting his sanity, Jonas checked the shoes in his other hand, but they looked just as worn as before. Jonas rubbed his eyes with his arm. Perhaps the sleep disruptions were leaving their mark after all. Casting one last doubtful look back, Jonas noticed that the corner was completely empty, as if the beggar had never been there. Shaking his head, Jonas looked at the strange coat in his hand. The cut was old-fashioned, and the fabric a good hand's breadth too long for him, although the old man hadn't seemed that tall. He fervently hoped that the rest of this day wouldn't be as confusing. After all, his future was at stake. End it there. That was the beginning section of Melody of a Curse by Jana Ruth. We didn't finish the chapter on this one today because the first chapter is 30-something pages long, and the next break is quite a wee way in as well. So we might come back to it at a later date, but that was the first section of Melody of a Curse. I really like that. Again, we have another book that opens a really high-intensity scene, a war scene straight away, but with quite a different feel to it. Obviously, that war scene was much more about the person involved and their emotions towards what was going on and how they felt about the war going on around them and how oppressive and terrible it was, as opposed to being about action. And I really like that. It's a great hook. It draws the reader in. Hopefully you felt drawn in as well. Very exciting opener, and then going straight into establishing just a little bit of a tease of possible magic going on. The coat changing, the door disappearing, a link between clothing items being worn out and not so worn out. Something there perhaps to do with the magic as well. I thought that was really cool and really well written, and I'm very interested in reading the rest of it. Even if I don't do any more of it on the channel, I will certainly be reading it myself as soon as I can. So a reminder again that Jana Ruth is an independent author, so get out there, support Aotearoa independent authors as much as you can. There'll be links in the description to their website and social media, the various places you can pick up their books, as always. And I do highly recommend picking up a copy of Melody of a Curse. I know that it's got excellent reviews as well as my own, and I have no doubt that the rest of Jana's work will be just as top-notch. As always, thank you very much for watching and listening, everyone. If you like this video, please consider leaving a like, and if you want to see more like this video, please subscribe. Ring the bell for whatever it does, and if you have any suggestions for books I might read in the future, please comment them below. Thank you so much once again, and I will see you next time.